Hello and welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick. An Oklahoma rancher and farmer, Les Feldick has been teaching homestyle Bible classes for 20 years in Iowa, Oklahoma, and Texas. Les Feldick's unique style of Bible teaching has made the books of the Bible come to life. When Les is teaching, it's so interesting that people say time just seems to fly by. And now, here is Les Feldick.
Okay, it's good to have everybody in again this afternoon, and we always like to remind our television audience that you folks come in from near and far, and we produce 4 of these programs right in succession. And always like to remind our viewers we had a call the other day from Maine. That's the first time we've heard from out there. But anyhow, we now have viewers from Maine to California, and from Florida to Washington State, and we want all of them to understand that when you see these same faces in the same place for 4 weeks in a row, it's just simply because we have produced 4 programs all in one afternoon. And again, I'm always so appreciative of all these folks that come in. In fact, we've even got a special visitor today. I know sometimes I've mentioned we've got people come over from Arkansas, but we've got a gentleman today that flew all the way out from North Carolina just to be with us today. And we just appreciate that. And so any of you out there in television, if you're ever going to come to the Tulsa area, you just give us a call and we'll tell you what day we'll be taping. And if necessary, why, we don't even mind putting you up for the night and give you a breakfast or whatever the case may be. My wife is quite hospitable. All right, now again, we always like to remind folks that all our past programs, because so many are just catching us now in the last week or two, and they want to know if they can pick up on everything that we've taught from the last 5 years. And we always like to let you know that all the past programs are available now in print as well as on the videotapes. So if you're interested at all, you give us a call or write to us and we'll get the information in the mail to you. All right, now we're going to pick right up where we left off in our last program, or our last lesson, which was in Romans chapter 3. And I'm going to take this very slowly because we're in an area that I'm afraid very, very few people ever get a real solid understanding of. Shouldn't end in preposition, should I? But anyway, we're going to take our time so that hopefully we can make it so plain that no one can be left confused. And so we're going to jump in with a little bit of review at verse 20 of chapter 3, where Paul now writes, and remember, Paul always writes to the believer who are predominantly Gentile. Now, I always say predominantly because Jews are certainly eligible for this salvation, and many Jews are coming to know the Lord. But it is predominantly God dealing with the Gentile, and so to the church at Rome, as well as to believers today, Paul writes, verse 20, "Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified. For by the law is the knowledge of sin." Verse 21, "But now," in other words, even though the law could not do a thing to bring someone into salvation, but the flip side is we do have something that does. And that is that now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, put into the spotlight. You remember, that's what I always do with the word manifested. The righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophet. Now, right here I always have to stop. You know, I emphasize Pauline teaching. I emphasize that for us today, 90% of our study time, I think 90% of our Bible reading should be in Paul's epistles. But never will I ever indicate that you forget about the rest of Scripture. The Old Testament is just as well fitted as the New, and it all dovetails together. And I think that's what I've been bringing out in the last 5 years, how that everything in the Old just dovetails with the New. But nevertheless, the Old Testament was under predominantly, again, the economy of law to the nation of Israel, who were under the law, with all their temple worship, their priesthood, their sacrifices. But now that God has turned to the Gentile, naturally that economy had to slip off the scene, and we have something totally different. And I know this may disturb a few people, but all I ask them to do is don't take my word for it. Search the Scriptures. Search the Scriptures. Do you find the same kind of language that you find in Romans and some of the other epistles of Paul back in the Gospels? And I'll tell you before you even start looking. No, you won't find this language in the Gospels. You won't find it in the Old Testament, because this is part of that revelation that Paul speaks of, the mystery, the secrets that have been held in the mind of God but are now being revealed. And this is what we have to home in on, are these new revelations. You know, I've used the illustration so many times, and I'll repeat it again. If you had a will and you've put it in your strong box that you probably had some good attorney put together 10 years ago, but a month ago you drew up a new will. You put it in the same strong box, and tomorrow you die. Well, when they look at your wills, they're going to see there's two of them, but which one are they going to declare as valid? Well, the latest one, the new one. Well, and it's the same way here with Scripture. We have to understand that Paul has now come with new revelations, revelations of things that had never been revealed before, and this is what we're going to be held accountable for. Willie and I, again, were talking last night. You know, denominations are so stringent, you know, and they don't want their people to get anything other than what they teach, and that's all well and good if they're lining up with the book. But you see, what I've tried to tell people on the program and in all my classes, always remember that when you stand before the Lord one day, He's not going to say, well, you were certainly loyal and obedient to your denomination. He's not even going to look at our denominational background. We're going to be judged according to the book. Not according to what Les says, but according to the book. And that's all I try to get people to see. What does this book say? Not what I say, what does the book say? All right? So now the righteousness of God. Now, that word righteousness of God, what does that really mean? God can never do anything amiss. Otherwise He wouldn't be God. So the righteousness of God really tells us that whatever God does is going to be absolutely fair and just and right. That's where we basically get the word righteousness. It's that which is right. All right? So now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, brought out into the light, and is laid out into the open. But it was still based on all the Old Testament writings, see? You don't throw your Old Testament away. I've had people tell me, well, I never look at the Old Testament. That's all by the Word, all by the book. No, it isn't. The Old Testament is still apropos. In fact, let me show you a verse. See, here we go again. I can't help it. Romans chapter 15. Can you find it, honey? Romans 15, and I want you to drop down to verse 4. Romans 15, verse 4, and then we'll go right back to chapter 3. And this just says it all. Romans 15, verse 4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime. Now what's he referring to? The Old Testament. See? All these things that were written aforetime were written for our doctrine, learning. Now you see the difference? Doctrine is what we better have straight in what we believe so far as our eternal destiny is concerned. Doctrine is what we need for living the Christian life today. But for our learning, that is to understand why do we have this doctrine. See the difference? And so the Old Testament is still apropos for our learning, to give us the background of how all this fell in place and that God can now turn to the whole human race with His tremendous plan of salvation. So it was written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. So you see, we got to use the whole book, cover to cover. All right, now then quickly back to chapter 3 of Romans. Verse 22, we spent almost one whole half hour on this, so we're not going to stop here very long. Even the righteousness of God, which is by or through the faith of Jesus Christ. And look who it's given to. Upon or unto all, and upon all them that, what? Believe. See? Believe. For there is no difference between what and what? Between Jew and Gentile. Everybody is now on the same level. The Jew used to be in a place of preeminence. He had the law, he had the word, he had the priesthood, but no more. There is now no distinction between Jew and Gentile. There's no difference. All right, then verse 23. The capstone of everything that God laid out in chapters 1 and 2. The immoral man, the religious man, the moral man. Didn't make any difference. All, everyone, every child of Adam is now under this decree. That what? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There isn't a person that has ever lived that can merit favor with God on his own. It's impossible. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We're all condemned. And I pointed out in our last series of programs, I don't know which one, I had the statements on the board, that we do not break the law. Let me see, I got to think for a minute. We do not break the law because we do certain things. We break the law because we're sons of Adam. See? And that's what we have to understand. We are sinners because we're sons of Adam. That's what I wanted to say. We're not sinners because we've broken the law. And people can't understand that. We are basically born sinners. All right? But now verse 24. It's not hopeless. Otherwise it would be. But because of all that God has done, it is not a hopeless situation, because here's the promise. Being justified, what's the next word? Freely, without a cause. Now the word justify, we better stop. I always like to define words. To justify someone is to declare them just as if nothing had ever happened. That's justification. To bring it into the scriptural realm, justification is that judicial act of God whereby He declares the sinner who believes just as if he'd never sinned. Well, now that's hard for us to swallow. Once God justifies you and I, you mean to tell me that God sees me just like He saw Adam before he fell? Yes. Yes. And that's hard for us to comprehend, but it's a biblical truth. We are justified without a cause. In other words, God didn't finally get backed into a corner and say, okay, I'll justify you. I'll declare you just as if I've never sinned, because after all, you've deserved it. No. God justifies us freely, without a cause, even though we don't deserve it, when we believe. See?